Howdy, this is Rob Shaw, the founder of Mountain Tactical Institute. Welcome to the MTI podcast. It's actually New Year's Day, January 1st, 2025. Hope you had a great holiday so far. Happy New Year's to you. Lots to talk about today. I'll be all over the place. My mind's kind of racing this morning. It's really interesting stuff in the ret and just some other thoughts that I've had. First, I kind of want to start with a story. I kind of touched on this in a ret a few times, and it involves disruption or cutting of undersea cables in the Baltic Sea. And I think I spoke about this, or at least had this in a ret last week. There was a power cable between Finland and I think Estonia that was cut, and just last week, and the Finns were trying to find out who did it. An update to that story is that now they suspect, and they've actually, I think, seized a freighter or tanker that was registered in the Cook Islands, but they think is part of the Russian shadow fleet. And I think they assume that this freighter drug its anchor over this power cable and damaged it or cut it. And I'm not sure exactly how much the damage was. But there's been lots of this lately up in the Baltic Sea. That the first one that came to mind was in September 2022, when the Nord Stream gas pipeline was destroyed. I think it was blown up. I don't think this is a gas pipeline between Russia and Germany, and I don't think anyone has found out who exactly did that, if it was Ukrainians or the Russians. Anyway, that was kind of the first time this came about. And then since that time, there's been others. Just recently in 2024 November, there were some comms cables between Lithuania and Sweden, and another between Finland and Germany that were cut or damaged. And there was a Chinese freighter that was suspected as being part of that. I don't know if it was just a freighter that was registered in Chinese, and this is part of the Russian shadow fleet. Anyway, these are just kind of interesting damages, or it seems like Russia just kind of does this with different countries it opposes or whatever. Just kind of messes with them with these kind of attacks like this that are not really attributed to them, but kind of are done by them. After the Ukrainian war, both Sweden and Finland asked to and were eventually joined NATO. So prior to that, both Sweden and Finland were neutral. And now Russia has as part of it, and I'm not too sure Putin took that into account, what happened to Sweden and Finland when he created Ukraine, but I don't think he wanted to see Sweden and Finland become part of NATO, which they are now. Anyway, I just wonder how much the Finns and the Swedes will take this. I also wonder, you never hear stories about us doing, or NATO countries or whatever, doing similar things to Russia. Just kind of underhanded. There's cases of Russian agents killing. I remember they killed some Russian dissidents in Britain a few years ago with like nerve gas. I don't know if you remember that case. Like there was this dissident and his daughter, and they touched something that had some nerve gas on it and killed him. And there's been other assassinations by Russia. I assume that we're doing the same thing to Russia or NATO countries are, but I'm not sure. You never hear about those stories in the Western media. Anyway, this story in Finland, kind of an aside here, remind me of a couple things. The first is this really great Netflix series. I think there's 2 or 3 seasons, called Border Town, and it's a Finnish series that I think it's in the Finnish language. And you have to read the subtitles, of course. But it involves this really interesting character. He's kind of this partially autistic detective. But anyways, there is some intrigue there between Russia and Finland. This was made before Finland became part of NATO. But there's part of that between, as I said, there's one character, this female detective who kind of moves between Russia and Finland, as maybe was part of the Russian security forces or intel forces at one time. Anyway, it's a great series. The first scene is really, or the first is a crime series, and the first crime involves this lady who's like sunk in a lake in a cage, and she has a hose to breathe through. Anyway, it's kind of like those Scandinavian type crime series, like the Lady with the Dragon Tattoo, kind of came from them. Anyway, really interesting, great series if you're interested. It's called Border Town. And also there was this there's a book called A Sea Story, and I didn't read it. I listened to it on book on tape like twice. It was so intriguing. But it's about a tragedy in 1994 there was this MS Estonia. It was a ferry, and it sank in the Baltic Sea, and nearly 900 people drowned or died in the sinking. And the author goes through the incident in details of what exactly happened. And it's just an incredible writer. I remember having a cross-country drive one time and listening to this book, and it was so intriguing. I actually listened to parts of it again. And it's called A Sea Story. Anyway, just something you might want to think about if you have a cross-country trip coming up or you want an interesting book to listen on tape. Second thing I want to talk about is similar to this, is Chinese computer hacks. And gosh, just recently there was a major incident reported by the U.S. Treasury Department of a Chinese hack into their systems. Major incident, and I remember there was a little bit of commentary about this, not much, but if you can imagine, that hackers got into the financial system of the U.S. and just made a few changes or something, and the disruption you could see just financially, that would impact us, immediately. So I read this with just intrigue, and again, this is one of those cases where I don't know if we are doing similar things to China. I can't remember where I heard this. It was on the radio or on a podcast I was listening to recently, and there was a question about our own cybersecurity stuff that the U.S. does, from the U.S. military, national defense, and businesses. And it seems like our emphasis is on cybersecurity and defending our networks. And there was commentary that I listened to, and this individual said, hey, are we doing all we can on the offense? And that's another deal, kind of like up there in the Baltic Sea with these cable cuttings. Are we doing the same thing to China? Are we hacking into their, government departments? I mean, this is not the first time, this has happened. In 2021, Chinese actors hacked into the Microsoft Exchange server, and I guess Microsoft is so ubiquitous across U.S. government and businesses that it gave them access to all kinds of U.S. government and businesses networks. In 2020, there was a solar winds hack. There's some kind of software called Orion software. I think it was cybersecurity software that a lot of companies used. And somehow China hacked into that and again gave them access to multiple U.S. departments and businesses. And then in 2021, U.S. Coast Guard reported a hack into their transportation and maritime transportation system. Anyway, and I had heard also that there's been instances of Chinese actor or government-sponsored hacks into the U.S. energy system. And I just wonder when one of these hacks would. I don't know what they're doing, if they're looking for, like business espionage business secrets, or if they're setting it up so that if we did go to conflict, they could unleash some type of hack into a nuclear reactor someplace, or disrupt the energy system of the U.S. or the financial system. I mean, the damage that could be done really quickly by a hack like this is just, it's just pretty phenomenal. And so I see these and I just wonder and hope that the U.S. is doing similar things offensively into our opponents or adversaries' systems, so that we could retaliate or instigate if we needed to. And you don't hear about that. If we are, I hope we are, but you don't read about it. The third story in a red that I kind of looked at is in Real Clear Defense, and it was titled 2024, the year of the drones. And they just had a list of a bunch of the different types of drone activities on the military side that we've seen over the past year. And I'll just kind of go through this story with you. Sea drones, and Ukraine has had great effect using some sea drones, kind of drone boats to sink Russian barges, attack oil rigs, and sink billion-dollar Russian warships. Actually, there was in February of last year, they sank a Russian battleship with a drone, which is just incredible. They used a sea drone with a mounted remote controlled machine gun to shoot at Russian helicopters. It's just really interesting, this drone warfare and what the Ukraine conflict has done to advance drone warfare. There's something called a trolley drone. It's a converted heavy missile powered by a turbojet engine and guided by GPS. It motors down a runway on a wheeled trolley, abandoning the trolley as it gains lift. Plane drones. The Ukrainians have adopted small kit-set sports planes into combat drones, flying them by remote control loaded with explosives. They flew one drone aircraft like 500 miles and damaged a Russian Chechen military facility with it. Drone swarms. Both Russia and Ukraine have used cheap plastic drone swarms to confuse and confound sophisticated radar systems. Gosh, which is really interesting. Drones are often used in conjunction with more sophisticated drones and ballistic missiles. And the Russians combined swarms of Iranian drones with some of their own missiles to attack Ukrainian infrastructure and civilians. I'm not too sure how that works. If they use the drones to confuse radar, or if the drones are used to attack also. Anyway, drones operated by long fiber cables in response. Drones are operated by attached thin fiber optic cables that are over 6 miles long. With no radio signal, the drone was impossible to detect and impossible to jam. However, when former U.S. Marine Troy Smother saw this, he built similar drones for Ukraine with incredible range of 15 miles. So, boy, you can't jam a drone if it doesn't have a radio signal, and if it's flying with a microscopic cable that's 15 miles long. Wow. I hadn't even heard of that. What an interesting development. Ground combat drones, robot ground drones are being used for a variety of purposes, including delivery of equipment such as landmines. And astonishingly, Ukraine has developed a tracked drone armed with a Browning machine gun, has a range of 8 miles, and also equipped with high-tech cameras for reconnaissance. Drone traffic lights. A military traffic light system that flashes yellow light when a distant hostile drone is detected and converts to red when there is a high-level threat, and green when there are no by threats at all. Drone detection from space. Specialized military drone branches. Ukraine and Russia have both established large dedicated military drone branches. I know I've read some stories where the U.S. military is doing the same. Western armies are offering different tactics. Every British and American Army platoon will now have a drone operator, and the 75th Ranger Regiment is being trained in using a short-range reconnaissance quadcopter drone. So anyway, year of the drone 2024, especially on the military side, super, super interesting. Another military type story in a read this week, and I wanted to talk about. There's two stories. One is is an opinion story or opinion piece in Fox News. And the title is "DEI is like a woke IED for the left's war against our military." And Trump's nominee for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, if I understand correctly, I haven't read it, but wrote a book about DEI in the military and is really critical of it, and has argued for meritocracy to be universally in the military. And he has also pledged since being nominated to fire any general or flag officer who was greatly involved in the DEI efforts in the U.S. military, including the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Brown, who is an Air Force general. Anyway, interestingly, there's a story I think it's in NBC News, and I guess that the Army-Navy game, President-elect Trump met with General Brown during the game. They had a good 20-minute conversation. Now he's rethinking allowing or firing this general when he takes office here in a few weeks. DEI in the military, I think DEI across the business world, I've been seeing more and more stories about this. As businesses have dropped and cut DEI departments, and even universities have done this. And it seems like that era that kind of came out of COVID is definitely on the wane. But one area where it has had some maintenance is in the U.S. military academies. There was a 2023 Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action for university. I think it was a USC case, University of Southern Carolina or Southern California. I'm sorry. And in that case, the Supreme Court ruled that affirmative action or race and gender couldn't be taken into account for college admissions, but they had a carve out for the military academies. The idea that the service academies, that the officer corps in the military should reflect somewhat the enlisted ranks and the diversity in the enlisted ranks. And I'm not sure, I'd have to look this up, but I think that the enlisted ranks in the U.S. military are overrepresented in terms of minorities based on the U.S. population. So the idea is that you want similar, or you want to have an officer corps that reflected the racial diversity of the enlisted ranks. And just recently, there was a lawsuit against the U.S. Military Academy, which is for the Army, where a federal judge upheld diversity affirmative action admissions for the U.S. Military Academy. I think that's on appeal. I just saw there's also now recently been a lawsuit filed against the U.S. Air Force Academy. I'm not sure where these will go, the service academies, since I distinctly remember the Supreme Court doing a carve out for the service academies when they made that 2023 ruling. Anyway, it's an ongoing fight, I guess, in the U.S. military in terms of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the racial quotas and affirmative action that comes from that. Another story in a read this week that I linked to has to do with Japan, and I guess Japan this year increased a 9.4% increase in their defense budget, and this is the 11th year in a row that Japan has done this. And I've commented on this before, and this headline caught my eye because that's a significant, nearly a 10% increase in defense spending. Historically, Japan has relied on the U.S. for its defense, and with the saber rattling by China, especially in the South China Sea, and also North Korea with their, it's acknowledged now that North Korea has nuclear weapons. that China, Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines are all, increasing their defense spending, and there's almost an arms race there in Asia right now going on. And I think a few weeks ago I spoke about there was an opinion essay that said South Korea should, which also has depended on the U.S. primarily for its defense. This essay argued that South Korea should, develop and build its own nuclear arms, just because of the threat from North Korea and also China, which does have nuclear arms. Anyway, a couple things that made me think about, or a couple things I thought about when I saw this story. One is, of course, the increase posturing of China in the Pacific, but secondly, the changes in the U.S. with the America First movement and the pulling back of our guarantees for our historic allies in terms of paying for their defense. And these allies are responding by, building up their own defense. But this will be interesting to see when Trump takes office exactly how far that goes. I think that there's this American First movement that definitely does not like, the forever wars that we've been involved in, and really questions overseas entanglements, which goes back to, President Washington. But also the more and more you're hearing about the budget crisis that we're having in the U.S. with our deficit and our inability to keep spending for defense like we have. So there's a couple of things kind of driving this, and our allies are responding by increasing their own defense spending. Anyway, I spoke about these before, and I think it's just really interesting developments. Moving on. There's something I was thinking about as I was going through a RET and the decline of kind of the news sources, the major U.S. media news sources. I don't know that the Washington Post right now is making money. The L.A. Times has had financial struggles. Journalists across the U.S. It's a hell of a time to be a journalist now with the decline of newspapers, with the increase of internet in terms of people getting their news. The New York Times is still going strong. I think they're having banner years, but they've pretty much gone, with their online subscription model. I think the Wall Street Journal is doing good. But the small newspapers are not doing as well. And one of the publications it's an online publication that I recently subscribed to, is called The Free Press. And this was started by a former New York Times journalist, and Barry Weiss is her name. And she was really critical of the biased New York Times, kind of started the Free Press. But one of the problems of Free Press, I just looked at their website this morning, is that there isn't much reporting on it. Mostly it's opinion pieces written by contributors. And so the original news stories, the original reporting, which takes journalists on the ground, writing news stories, which are separate from opinion pieces. My sense is that, that is declining. You need people just doing that. And you may not know, but I'm a former journalist. My first business after the academy, I started a newspaper and was a small town newspaper guy for 10 years. And so it was, there's a difference between opinion pieces and just writing the news. And the opinion pieces come after the news stories. And I've kind of been following Twitter and X.com. I really haven't done that until this last few months. And again, there isn't a lot of original news on there. There's a lot of opinion. Anyway, the original news stories, I think, are in decline, and I think that doesn't bode well for staying informed. It'll be interesting to see how that develops into the future. But at least from the free press perspective, it's mostly a collection of opinion pieces, and the original reporting just isn't there like you get at the New York Times and some of these other historical publications. You do get some of that, in some of the resources, um, Defense Daily, more Task and Purpose, War on the Rocks. Those websites do great defense reporting. So there is some reporting going on. I just don't know if they have the reach or the contacts that you can get at a major news organization. Anyway, it's all developing. There's nothing we can do about it. But it's a thought I had in terms of the decline of the original news sources and how that might affect us staying informed into the future. Kind of moving on now to mountain stuff. Kind of going to talk about layers here. And I missed a story, but I found this. I forget, I was doing some work collecting a ret, and I came across a story from Outside Magazine, and it was just a gear story, the best men's shells from 2023. And the number one shell they had there was from a small company. I think they're in Italy. It's called Crazy. It's a Crazy company, and it's a Crazy fly jacket. And this is like a 1.7 ounce windbreaker, pretty much. And the reviewers are just blown away. It's not. It's the lightest jacket they've ever tested. The lightest emergency layer on the market. Packs down the size of a large clementine. It has stretched nylon fabric that cuts out light wind surprisingly well. This isn't totally windproof, but it makes most of the strength out of strong gusts, reported a longtime tester who wore the jacket while hiking, biking, and running. After testing the water repellent shell on the outskirts of Hurricane Ian, the tester emphasized it isn't meant to hold up more than just mist in terms of precipitation. It's not a rain shell. But the testers agreed that the fly jacket is, on the other hand, unparalleled in terms of breathability. The most breathable jacket of its type I've ever used. I was able to wear this on steep mountain bike climbs and moderate temps without hating my career choice. It isn't impressive. No, it has like a zipper, no pockets, and it's kind of a jacket you throw in your bag on any adventure. What is interesting to me about this story is I'm a huge believer in just a light wind shell as a layering piece. And it's really hard now actually to find just a wind jacket for sale that's just a light windbreaker that's technical, kind of made for outdoor stuff in the mountains. I kind of discovered this by accident when I was doing backcountry skiing. When I first started Mountain Athlete there, I was actually commuting from Pinedale, Wyoming to Jackson, where I had the gym. And it's or from Bondurant, south of there. And on my way, there was a peak that I could, called Cream Puff, that was right on the highway, and I would backcountry skin up it and then ski down on the way into work. And one of the things when it's, I would do this in all conditions, and a lot of time it's just frigid in this little canyon where this Cream Puff peak is, and it would be often below zero, 10, 15 degrees below zero. When I would leave the truck and start skinning up this hill. And, at those temps, you'd want to have on, one of the mistakes you make early on when you start doing this type of work is layering up, and having all your layers on and starting. And then 5 minutes into it, you got to start stripping layers, and it's just a pain in the butt. So what I eventually did when I got my system together is I just had a light windbreaker. It was just actually, I can't remember what brand it was, like Black Diamond windbreaker, maybe cost $70, and a single layer shell, or a single layer lightweight crew neck top. like a Capillonia silkweight Capeline. So this is when they had their silkweight stuff, but the lightest one. And, just a light pair of gloves and a hat. And, I'd start skinning. And the first 5 minutes, I would be shivering. My hands would be, my fingers would all be frozen, and I would just be shivering like crazy. But after 5 minutes, I warmed up. And the beauty of that system is I could wear that system all the way to the top of cream puff. I didn't have to strip the windbreaker. If anything, I would just unzip, the front of it for a little bit if I was overheating. But once you kind of got out of the trees, you'd get into the ridge and wind would be blowing anyway, and you could just zip right back up, and you'd be covered all the way up. So when you're moving, and later on, even when I would go to the resort, lift assisted skiing, I would take a windbreaker shell like that, and I just stick it in my pocket. They're so small, you can stick them in your pants pocket. If you have like a front zip pocket, or a hip, or a thigh pocket, or even inside your jacket, doesn't matter. And I would just wear, like a silk weight base layer, maybe a midweight fleece top on top of that, and then my Gore-Tex shell, which is my outer ski jacket. If I got cold, I wouldn't have to take and, put on a puffy or anything. I would just put that wind shell layer underneath my outer ski jacket layer, my Gore-Tex jacket. And even inside like that, the windbreaker, even though it really wasn't break wind, did an amazing job of increasing my warmth. You're really not working hard going uphill when you're doing lift-assisted skiing, but you got to stay warm on the lift. It's where you got the coldest. And it just did an amazing job. And then I remember there was one of the guides I'd worked with, is a really great guide named Dan Korn, a mountain guide, and he had just come back from guiding on Denali. And he really swore by the combination of the Patagonia Houdini windbreaker and their R1, which is their lightest fleece hoodie, and he would just wear that guiding on Denali in those cold temps, because if you're moving or you're digging out your tent or whatever like that, you're moving and the wind's blowing, of course, on Denali all the time, howling, but you're generating your own heat, and you quickly overheat if you put anything heavier on. If you took on the windbreaker and just wore your fleece, you'd get cold because of the wind. Wind layers, I've never really seen others use them this way as I have, and it's pretty hard now to find a wind layer. Our Turks used to make one called the Squamish jacket, but I see they don't make them anymore. Black Diamond had one. They had a wind layer, and I can't find it on their website anymore. I did just recently pick up a Patagonia Houdini, which is, many backcountry people swear by, and they're only like $100. I got it like 40% off, so like $60. So you can definitely get one of those. But there's not a lot of companies who make these anymore, and I assume it's because most of the people who buy gear are kind of newbies to the mountains, and they want Gore-Tex. And so, wind layers like a light wind shell, people just don't realize the versatility of it. So I'd recommend if you're in the mountains, you haven't tried that, just getting a Houdini or finding another wind shell and just testing it. I mean, the Houdini only weighs like 1.3 under 4 ounces. It's very light. And a fleece layer is like 11 ounces. They're heavy, so they're very light and very versatile. I've never been a fan of any type of, soft shells for the upper body, for sure. And in terms of fleece, even like a heavyweight fleece layer, they're so heavy. They're more breathable than a down layer, but they, like a heavyweight hoodie fleece layer weighs more than a lightweight down puffy. and it's damn near as expensive. You can get a lightweight down puffy from REI or LL Bean or something, one of their lightweights, which are much warmer than a fleece layer. They have some windproofness to them, and they're almost lighter. But I have found one fleece layer that I like, and is made by the online hunting brand called QU, and it's QU is spelled KUIU, and it's their Peloton 97 fleece hoodie. And this is the lightest fleece hoodie I've ever found. It's definitely warmer than a silk weight base layer for sure. And it doesn't replace or could, I guess, replace a silk weight base layer if you were, on a cold backcountry winter hunt or something. But it's about the only fleece layer I take backcountry hunting with me. It only weighs 5.6 ounces. It's super versatile, and you can actually, at that weight, you can get two of these and layer them on top of each other for the same weight as one heavyweight fleece layer. They're super light, super packable, compressible. And so if you haven't checked out the 97 fleece hoodie and you're in the market for some new fleece, check it out. I haven't seen anything by any of the major mountain gear brands that have come close to anything like this fleece hoodie from QU. So that's, I guess, my spiel on mid layers. Check out, if you haven't, definitely try a wind layer, the Houdini or something, and it's amazing. The outside story is linked, and the jacket they referenced, this from this Italian company called Crazy's, their Crazy Jacket Fly. Thing's expensive. It's like $200. Super light, 1.7 ounces, but that's pretty expensive for just a wind layer. And you can get a Houdini jacket on sale for probably $70 and used for cheaper on eBay or something. So, anyway, wind layers. I guess that's my spiel on that. I want to talk a little bit about New Year's resolutions. This time of year, I always get the emails from athletes out there with things they're trying to do in the coming year. And a lot of times they come with artificial events. So, for example, they want to do a series of Spartan races over the course of the year, or they want to do a series of the Go Ruck events over the course of the year, or some similar types of events. I always consider these types of events artificial events, and I always I tell them how I would train for these events, of course, from our library, or how I should prepare. But generally also suggest that they consider doing instead of these types of artificial physical challenges, more realistic physical challenges in the mountains or wherever. For example, you could take, and recently I had a guy email me and he with a similar question, and I suggested that he grab a fly pole, and instead of the events that he had kind of scheduled out, take and start the southern end of the Wind River Range in Wyoming, where I grew up. There's a trailhead called the Big Sandy Trailhead, and hiking the Highline Trail, the Wind River Range, all the way to Green River Lakes, about 60 miles. His event he wanted to do was a 60-mile event, and instead of doing it in a couple days, take a week, or even better, 2 weeks in his fly pole and fish his way up there. The Wind River Range is full of lakes that are full of trout, and it's incredibly beautiful country. The Highline Trail is above tree line. It's incredible up there. You're at 10,000 feet or higher, going over these mountain passes. If you do it in late August, there's no mosquitoes up there. It's plenty warm. And it would just be an incredible experience. If you don't fly fish, learn on the trip, or take a light rate spinning rod. It doesn't matter. Anyway, there are just incredible trips like that you can do in the outdoors, especially if there's not only a fitness component to it, but a technical learning component to it. In that case, if you've never backpacked before or fly fished, I mean, it's just not that complicated. But there is some technical learning that goes along with it. Some skills that aren't fitness related. A lot of times, when you go to do some type of activity, the fitness is the easy part, and a lot of people will focus on the fitness instead of the more difficult work, which is learning the skill, which isn't necessarily fitness related. I've recently taken up a sport called downwind foiling. Don't need to get into that. When I say recently, I've been working on it for a couple of years. But I won't get into it now, but it's been quite an educational experience for me to learn the skills to where I'm almost at the point where I kind of can start doing this. And I've tried in the past couple of years and just been killed multiple times. I don't have the technical skills. It's not a fitness issue. I'm just learning the technical skills. And I can tell you, just as a 56-year-old, person, that the technical journey, the learning journey, has just been really, really rewarding. And one of the things I'm concerned about as I grow older, and believe me, my body is starting to feel the impacts of age, has for years. I've had a foot fusion. I've had a hip replacement already at my young age. Young age for hip replacements. I have some pretty significant knee and other types of arthritis. So all the things that come with being active over the years and lifting as much weight as I had and trained as hard as I have, and kind of just using my body like I wanted to, and there's no regrets there. But one of the things I'm concerned about moving forward is, shifting from physical type adventures to really growing intellectually and exercising my brain more. There's ways, there's a lot of research in terms of dementia, and I've just read so many sad stories about dementia and Alzheimer's with older people. And I've seen in my personal just experience paying attention to older people, that the older people who keep working as long as they can definitely seem happier, are clearly more intellectually alert and involved and up to date, and their world isn't as small. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but I guess if you're putting together your New Year's resolutions, and some of those are fitness based, which is kind of, the fitness gym's best month of the year is always January, right? And you want to do an event that kind of keeps you in line, I would encourage you not to limit that event to some type of fitness event, like a marathon or a CrossFit event, or a Go Ruck event, or some type of artificial adventure race or something like that. But to go on a serious outdoors adventure, and you can definitely add a physical component to it. You can go and go to some mountain range and do a different peak bagging every other day, or bag a different peak. Go to Colorado and for 10 days and bag 14,000 foot peaks in 10 days. One every other day. You can certainly train for that, but gosh, you'll learn so much just in terms of moving through the mountains and mountain movement and gear stuff and mountain awareness and all types of different skills, moving on third class terrain, shoe selection, layering systems, all those different skills, which really add to the physical component or the physical challenge of the event. So I guess that's my recommendation. Even if it's, I can tell you, even surfing, if you're a new surfer, surfing is very physical. And so to spend a week, just learning to surf someplace, I mean, and the surfing is much more technical and frustrating than you'd ever imagine. And it's much more than just standing up on a board. It's reading the waves, knowing which wave to paddle into, knowing where to be. There's so much to it. Mountain biking, gosh, the technical, learning how to ride the mountain bike technically, in addition to the physical aspect of it. Like one of the things I hope to do in one of these coming summers is a long traverse the Wyoming range in Wyoming on a mountain bike. And there's a lot of, bike packing where you're actually just carrying the bike on your shoulders because trails aren't really established there. But there's also just a lot of technical mountain bike riding. And I don't have that technique, something to learn. Anyway, that what I'd encourage you is you're putting together your New Year's resolutions for this year. A couple more things here. There a lot of stuff on mental health and exercise and diet and 10 things you can do. And you look at these articles in Men's Health or whatever, they're all the same. But they're all solid information. But one of the things that reading one of these remind me of is a documentary. I think it's on Netflix. It's called Stutz, Stuz. And it's a documentary put together by a comedian. I think it's Noah. Let me see if I can bring it up. I forget the comedian's name, but it's on this. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Jonah Hill, comedian Jonah Hill, and his therapist, Dr. Phil Stutz. And it goes into Dr. Phil Stutz' method in terms of how he does therapy. And I don't need to go into that. Anyway, it's actually a beautiful documentary as it talks about the relationship between this doctor and Noah. And it's heartwarming, but it's educational too in terms of mental health. What is really interesting is Dr. Stutz says that just getting exercise, cleaning up your diet, and getting some sleep can account for 85% of your initial improvements in therapy. And so if you're feeling down or whatever, clean up your diet, get some exercise, and get some sleep, and it'll make a huge difference. Great advice. I think a lot of us don't take, but really makes a huge difference. And I think I'll end it there as we go into this new year. We have some new podcasts that we're going to be coming out with here fairly soon. We're working on one I hope to be called Strength Coach Chronicles, where I interview strength coaches and really kind of go into the weeds of programming. Programming is everything. I program hours and hours every month, putting together programs for MTI, all the daily programming and new programming. I think about programming and read about it all the time. And every chance I get that I've had in the past of sitting down and talking to a really good strength and conditioning coach about their programming, it's just a wonderful conversation. I hope to bring that to you, a future podcast series. And then also another one I'm kind of working on is, I think I'm going to call it X-Men or something. Anyway, I want to just start a series maybe with 2 or 3 other men my age in the 50s. We're Generation Xers, kind of talking about what we're dealing with in our lives right now, things we're thinking about. A few years ago, I did through Mountain Tactical, I did a quiet professional working groups with, excuse me, 3 to 4 small groups of quiet professionals out there. And I kind of grouped them by age. There were some in the 30s. There was one group of women in the 30s, a group of men in their 40s. And these were all mountain or tactical athletes or just followers of MTI. And one of the groups I worked with was men my age, some tactical athletes, mountain athletes. And it was really a rewarding conversation for us as we kind of talked about the issues that we're all facing in our lives and, applying some of the principles of quiet professionalism I've used over the years. Um, so hopefully a couple of projects I hope to do here in 2025. All right, that's it for this week MTI podcast. I'm gonna try to improve include some of the links, and hope you have a great holidays and happy New Year to you. And we'll talk to you next week.